How many of y'all have been to a Neighborhood Connections meeting or an event? Okay, mostly everybody, right? So we usually start with a check-in question. So we had an awesome check-in question this morning for you, and I just want you to have those conversations within your tables around this question. So the question is, why is your community important to you? Why is your community important to you? All right, so think about it for a minute and then dive in. You got like, what, 5 minutes? 4?
Yeah.
5 minutes to have the conversation. Why is your community important?
Each person, go one by one.
One by one, yep.
One person start, go around the circle.
Yep. All right, how was that? How was that? Why don't we just go around really quickly, popcorn style. What are some really cool things we heard at some of the tables? Why is community important? What are some really cool things we heard? No, we heard something. We were talking.
We had a cool sound bite here.
A cool sound bite, yeah.
From this table. The 5 people that I spent the most time with. And the people who impact you the most. So you also want to, give back to them in the same way.
Oh, that's great.
That's what makes community very important.
That's awesome. Awesome, thank you. Yes,
I
ma'am.
heard that community is important to some of us as well, because it sometimes makes you who you are, and then you can learn and grow, and you can stay the same, but other people can help you as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Who else?
I think community extends beyond your physical boundaries.
Okay.
It's the people you meet.
Yeah, that's right. Anyone else? This table, nothing to share?
Go for it.
Yeah, community is it's a fundamental part of your existence.
Right.
I mean, it's the other side of you in the collective sense.
Yes.
You are the individual, but you're also the we. And community is the we part of who you are.
Awesome. Awesome. So why are check-in questions important in these conversations? Or the conversations we're going to have on the 24th?
Make sure that every voice is being heard.
That's right. That's right. What else?
They're icebreakers.
Right. It's sort of an icebreaker, right? We're going to talk about icebreakers in a minute, but it lets people open up in the conversation, right? It's also a way to introduce ourselves, right? We usually go around and introduce ourselves, and I'm sorry we didn't do that. We had to cut a little bit of time, but when you do this on the 24th, once you go into your check-in question or your icebreaker, you want folks to introduce themselves, maybe say what neighborhood they're from, and then go into the question. All right? Why else is it important?
You immediately start off by finding common ground.
Oh, all right. I like that. Right? It sets the tone for the day, right? That check-in question lets everybody chime in, and it sets the tone for the day, and everybody, you listen to everybody's voice, right? And there's going to be some folks who might answer the check-in question, and you might not hear from them again during that day. But you want to be mindful as a facilitator that you want to bring folks in at appropriate times, right? You don't want to pick on folks and say, hey, we haven't heard from you, but you want to nudge folks a little bit to get into the conversation, right? So make sure that you use a check-in question that day, right? The theme that day is place, right? And so the check-in question can be anything around place, all right? So thank you for that. Now we're going to have Dr. Chuck talk a little bit about why icebreakers are important. We also have a facilitation guide at the table. So they look like this, right? And there's some sections in here that sort of walk you through the role of a facilitator. And it talks a little bit about the welcome and introductions, and then the check-in and the icebreakers, right? So you can use these on the 24th to sort of guide your conversations if you feel stuck.
Thank you. And I'm going to stand back here so that the microphone picks up my voice a little bit. So as Jerry said, and as you said, check-ins and icebreakers are really important to create an environment that says everybody's welcome, everybody's included, and to actually identify common ground. So the purpose of common ground we're going to hear about from Stephanie in a minute, but I want to start that conversation by looking at the quote over on the door there. from Rumi, which is an ancient quote, and it says, "Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there." Out beyond the ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field, and I'll meet you there. So common ground is that field. We're building that field where we get beyond who's right and who's wrong to connect together through our stories, through our personal lives, and through this year, the power of place. And as you said, community is a combination of people and place. So it's a very exciting opportunity, and we are excited about you being facilitators. And so this guide is your roadmap, and just to say a couple things about it, we'll go back to the first 2 pages in a minute but we wanted to make this training more like a common ground experience. So we tried to create a welcoming environment. We provided food. We have some decorations a little bit. We had, thank you, Noel, and best apples I've had in a long time. They're really good. And then having intimate conversations at smaller tables rather than one large conversation. So the setup is important. Think about what made you feel welcome today. And then take a look at that welcome and introductions, which we did, the check-in, which we've done, and then if you, we're going to go to the conversation in a minute, but we're going to hear more about common ground first. But before I do that, I want you to look at the next page, which is really a sample agenda. And so you'll see some check-in or icebreaker questions there. So take a look at those, and just at your table, take 2 minutes and say, what's an icebreaker or check-in that you like, that you've used, and share that. And then you also have a sample agenda at your table that's blank. And so if you want to write in a new idea of an icebreaker, you can do that as well.
Got any more sample agendas?
Yeah, I don't have color ones, but I have some black and white ones. They look like this. So. All right? So take 2 minutes and say, what's a check-in question you think would work well on June 24th? One person from each table share one idea that you came up with that you liked. Okay. State your name.
Sharisha Barrett. I use the penny one. Penny activity where you pick a penny out of a jar and you tell the participants of what happened during that time. So for example, 1967, what was going on during that time period? What memory can you remember? So forth. So
yeah.
That's an activity.
So for the sake of the mic, each person grabs a penny and states what they were doing that year and what they meant or something. Okay, back here.
Jennifer gave us rosebud and thorn. Something that has blossomed, something that is blossoming, and something that's kind of giving you a little hint.
All right, and go ahead and state your name again.
Your name? Oh, Carla.
Carla, thank you. Back in that last corner table.
We just like what you had. I mean, why is place important?
Okay.
Right. We love the questions you had as well, to the icebreaker here.
All right.
Yeah, so we didn't actually hone in on anything specific.
But you had a good conversation.
But we had a good conversation, and we concur with everything that's been said.
Name?
Oh, and my name is Armand Asante.
and I'm Dorothy Lamont.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Okay. All right. One of the things you can do is also have name tags at your event, and I think you probably will, so that would help. The other resource you have on your table is called Facilitating Community Conversations, and on page 7 of that is a series of check-in questions. And the check-in questions are a little shorter than icebreakers. Icebreakers are a little longer. And so we have a number of check-in questions there. We don't have the penny one. I like that one. And then there's a page or two of icebreakers that you can use. One of the things you have to think about is how much time you want to spend on this. And so I like the check-ins because it's name, where you're from, and one sentence. Go ahead. Were you going to make a comment?
I was going to ask if people kind of take a long time.
Yeah.
Is there a way that you prefer? Or like maybe like a rule? Is this like the time to start saying, hey, we're going to do this once we want to just make sure everybody's like brief? Like, how do you want to?
So a couple things I'll say, and then I can jump in. What Jerry modeled is he said take 5 minutes to do this, so you give people a total time, and then it'd be and you can put it up on a piece of flip chart paper. You can say name, community, and then the question, and you can say in one sentence, in 3 words if it's a big group. And we also did it at each table, so that if we would have done it around the whole circle, it would have taken 4 times as long. So those are some ideas.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I would add, something we do at Neighborhood Connections, is when we're going around and we know there's a lot of people that are going to answer the same question, we have a timekeeper, and then sometimes we have like musical instruments. So when the minute's done, we just start either clapping the table or whatever, playing the maracas, so folks know it's time to move forward. So you can do something fun like that.
Okay? All right, now, so think about how much time you want to have on that. Your sample agenda has it only for 10 to 15 minutes. And like today, it's hard to sometimes start right on time, and so you have to build in some time for that, for greeting people, welcoming people, and doing that icebreaker. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, and she's going to talk more about where did Common Ground come from, what's it about, and what is this year's theme. And you can look back at your document as well for that.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everybody. Now that we've kind of broken the ice, I'm going to bring it down and talk about history. But I did want to just give a little background on Common Ground, but really quick. How many people in the room were a part of Common Ground last year? Awesome. That's great. So thank you guys for coming back. I'm really excited, and thank you for those of you who are new. That is the goal this year, is to really grow the format and to get the word out a little bit more. But I wanted to talk a little bit about why the Cleveland Foundation is doing this. So we were inspired by several different other communities who've been doing large-scale community conversations in this way. Most notably, Chicago started doing it 5 or 6 years ago now with a format called On the Table, and it has been an incredibly powerful way for that community, very large community, to connect all on one day. They started small with about 5,000 people across their regional area connecting, and then in the last couple years they've been well over 100,000 people connecting and having community conversations. And other organizations and entities within the community have taken that format and rolled it into different tools that they've used. So for example, the Chicago Police Department has been using it as a way to gather in small communities or on particular street corners or in neighborhoods to have conversations with the community so that dialogue is being heard. And so we were really inspired by that and wanted to do something similar here in Cleveland, but give it a particular Cleveland spin. So we started last year in 2017. It was our first year, and had a really incredible experience. We had 42 locations across Cuyahoga County and connected about 2,000 people all on one day. Last year it was on July 30th. We're really excited with the way that this year has rolled out. We're already at over 65 locations with a capacity of about 3,000 across a 5-county imprint, which is pretty incredible. We initially limited it to Cuyahoga Lake and Geauga, which is the Cleveland Foundation's actual service footprint, but I had a couple folks from Ashtabula and Lorraine call me and say they felt left out. So we told them they could absolutely be a part of it. So we're excited about that. But the main thing that is happening this year, I think, is that at the end of last year, we did a post-event survey, and there are copies of the survey back there if you'd like to take a look at what the report was. We had a huge amount of participants give us some really great input after last year's event, and we used that to improve this year's structure. And so that's actually where the idea for these facilitation trainings and the facilitation structure came from, because last year's comment was that Common Ground, they wanted a little bit more structure. And so this year we've built on an infrastructure to have there be volunteer facilitators and a training structure that's offered for free to the community, so people can sort of learn those best practices on facilitating a conversation, but then also kind of do a deep dive into the Common Ground format, which will hopefully bleed through and benefit the years to come, because we're going to build sort of a cohort of really experienced Common Ground facilitators and hosts and people who are really invested in the format to continue these conversations. So that was one of the new additions this year was these trainings. But then we also are partnering with Case Western and Neighborhood Connections and IOBI to offer a follow-up process for taking action after the Common Ground conversations. And this is outlined a little bit in the facilitator guide, and they're gonna talk about it in depth later. But I just wanted to give a little preview and talk about why that came to be. It was a direct response to the responses we got from last year's Common Ground participants, which was they went through these Common Ground conversations and they were really fired up, they were really excited about taking the next step, and the Common Ground format did not at that time have an infrastructure to allow that. It was really about sort of having a conversation, it was about connecting with your fellow community members and seeing what happens at that point. But there was no sort of scheduled or outlined path. And that's okay. I think we have built this year a very robust way for people to stay engaged with Common Ground and with community partners after the conversation. But I want to underscore that getting together with your community and sitting down and sharing a meal and a conversation, and if you walk away and that's all you do, is enough. That's a brave thing to do, to sit down with a bunch of people you don't know and talk about really important things. That being said, we did want to provide that, and thanks to the incredible efforts of Neighborhood Connections and IOBI, we're going to be offering that this year, and it will also be attached to some small grant match funds. So they'll talk about that a little bit more in detail. But that's sort of what's new for this year. Again, thank you guys for taking part in this experiment with us. I wanted to talk a little bit really quickly about our theme question, since that's what we're going to be talking about today. And we went back and forth a lot and chose our theme question of why does place matter, for a lot of different reasons, but mostly because there's such an incredible momentum in Cleveland right now around this idea of place. I think Cleveland has a very unique pride of place that sort of involves sort of an intense pride with sort of also this like chip on the shoulder sort of element, you know what I mean? And I think there's a lot to talk about with that. But we also didn't want it to be just about the physical space. It's also about those intangible places. And you can see when you look through our list of host sites that people have really interpreted the theme in a lot of different ways. So we have a conversation that's going on about social media and the impact of that place on people's lives, and that's very intangible. That's not necessarily a physical space, although sometimes it feels like it is, right? We've got people talking about historical place. So where have we been in the past? Where are we now, and where are we going? And so I think as you're leading these conversations, we need to make sure we allow that space to talk about place as a place, but also as an idea. And that was the goal for having that conversation. I think it's a really valuable thing to be doing at this day and age, because looking at what we can do here in our own place is really important to feel empowered and feel like we're making strides toward progress. So just to wrap up my little spiel, I just want to talk a little bit about why the Cleveland Foundation feels like Common Ground is valuable. I talk about Common Ground all the time, constantly, and probably the number one question I get is from people kind of going, well, what's in it for you? You being the Cleveland Foundation, and why do you feel like this is important? And I think the answer to that is twofold. One is that the Cleveland Foundation is a really unique agency, and Cleveland is really, really unique that we have, speaking as myself as a Clevelander, not as a Cleveland Foundation employee, we're really lucky and unique to have this kind of resource that the foundation has. It has such a wide reach in the community. It has a very unique ability to kind of convene in a different way than I think a lot of other agencies of its size, like the government or other agencies in that way. So it's kind of uniquely positioned to convene the community in this way. The other answer is that it's not really about the Cleveland Foundation's goals. It's about what we're doing in order to support all of you and the hosts and the facilitators and the community that's coming together, because hosts and the people who participate in Common Ground are the ones that make it. Cleveland Foundation just offers the infrastructure. But the people in this room are the ones who make the experience what it will be for the people in the community. And that's why this conversation is so incredibly important, and I thank you for your time. And please call me if you have any questions, or if Eventbrite is giving you a headache. So thanks, everybody.
So thank you. So creating positive and common ground conversations, it doesn't happen by accident. And so there's a lot of intentionality that goes into that. So there's some buttons that you may have picked up at the back, and there's some stickers and different things that are part of creating a civil environment. And Noel is going to talk about the civility rules that are actually on the second page of your handout.
Hi, everyone. All right. How many of you have a pin on today? One of the common ground pins? Raise your hand. All right. So one of the things we didn't do this morning when you guys were checking in was encourage you to get pins. It's something we're going to encourage everyone to do with their conversations. I'll explain why, but I'm also going to pass around the jar. I will. Pass around the jar so you guys can each grab one. And I'm going to go to the mic so that everyone can hear me, especially everyone there. So my name's Noel Celeste, and I'm actually here today as part of the City Club of Cleveland, where I do work. Last year I was involved in helping design conversations with Stephanie, and this year I'm actually leading one for myself with another project that I do, so I'm very excited about that. And I've been asked to talk about civility rules. Part of the reason we came up with these buttons and this pledge was because conversation can be complicated. A lot of people avoid conversation because they don't know how to be a part of it and how to be positive. It can also be very easy, right? You can sit down to dinner and have a conversation. But when you want to make sure everyone is involved and you want to talk across difference, it's really important to create a space where that is valued. So we thought a couple things. One, make it really clear what some of those values are. And that's what you see listed here in terms of some things that we think are best guides for creating positive conversation. And then the idea of the pin is that when people are coming in and they see these, what are they now, 6 different values, they're attracted to one in particular, right? You probably are reading through the pins and going, which one is me? Today I picked look forward, since we have an event coming up, right? So look forward. Before it might have been listen to understand, which is always a really good one for me. The idea is the person who has that pin on can help you as a facilitator also look for that value in the conversation. So one of the things you can do is use these values to come back to center if you need to, or to encourage participation in particular ways, because there's language we've all agreed is a part of what we're building. And my hope and my reason for doing this, and especially the pins, which by the way, we see people wear into the City Club well past Common Ground. I see people come in, and I know they were a part of Common Ground, which is so beautiful. They're wearing them in their daily lives. Is that we want the lessons of positive conversation to go into people's lives. We want them to go home and have conversations at home that reflect some of these best practices, and at church and in their school or wherever they might be in dialogue. I feel like oftentimes we think the social media threads are conversation, but you're not. It's a very different tool that we're using, and we're losing track of how to have dialogue. So hopefully these values help do that. I know you all know how to read, so I'm not going to go through reading the small detail of them, but I would spend some time thinking about them and what they mean to you. Value all voices, listen to understand, speak from experience, respect everyone, look forward. This was particularly important for a common ground kind of conversation where we want to look at building as well. And one that was added this year thanks to partners with us, question kindly, which we thought was also a really important way for people to cross over difference. So as you go through your conversations today, and as you talk to your host and as you prepare, think about how you might want to integrate these, but definitely I encourage you, make sure everyone as they're checking in has a pin on, and we'll also have a card that they can have with them so that they know kind of what they've committed to in that conversation. We found it was really helpful. Last year we didn't have facilitators, so we definitely needed it, but this year I think it's a way to help boost and support what you'll be doing as a facilitator.
Okay.
Cover it?
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Noel. And as Noel said, one of the hats she's wearing is from the City Club today, and we're very excited because the City Club is really a bastion of civility, right? And so
On a good day.
yeah, on a good day, yeah. So they model that every day. The next thing I want to go over is actually starting the conversation. And so again, you have your sample agenda. If you look at this page again, on the left-hand side it says holding the conversation. Use a structured format or an informal approach. We're going to use a more structured approach today, but your primary role is to guide the conversation around the theme. Why does place matter? Your host might have a specific sub-theme, like why does place matter in the Glenville neighborhood? Or why does place matter around education of our children? So there's different hosts are actually having different themes, so you'll check with your host on that. You're encouraged to use the sample agenda, and if I want to just, again, you can read, but the last paragraph, if you want to take an informal approach, you can place sample questions on the table for people to follow or create a self-guided conversation prompts at tables. So you could just have a menu of questions that you think might be useful for people to talk about. And at each table in your Common Ground event, you could have people pick a conversation starter. That's a little bit more like the way it was last year. And so we're not going to dictate how you do this. We're just going to try to give you as many tools as possible for doing that. So for today, we're going to use the more formal structured approach. And out of the sake of time, we're not going to do the full-blown hour-long. We think it should be like an hour-long conversation, and it can be over a meal. As you see in that blue bar on the right-hand side, it says the meal. And so you'll have to decide with your host, are people going to go up and get food? Is it going to be served family style? Are they going to get their food after the icebreakers? And again, we didn't do the kind of formal presentation about Common Ground until after you did the check-in, because we wanted people to feel comfortable. And so I would encourage you to think about doing something for people to get to know who's in the room before you start the meal. That would be my preference, because otherwise people will be kind of sitting at the tables like, I don't really know who's here, and they'll make their own way, but it may be easier to actually do some kind of a check-in first before the meal. And then the conversation itself. So we're going to start with that first question on the right-hand side. When you think of today's theme, what place comes to mind to you that matters and why? And this can be like a mini park. This can be like a park bench in your favorite location in your community. It could be a coffee shop you go to where you have friends that you meet. Anything. It could be your front porch. But when you think of today's theme, what place comes to mind that matters to you and why? So we're going to ask you to, again, be fairly structured and take about 10 minutes to go around, so that if there's 5 at your table, that'd be 2 minutes a person to answer this question. And then we'll go on to a second question, and then we'll do a debriefing after you've done all the questions. Okay? So, any questions? Clear enough?
Go over that.
So you have up to 2 minutes a person. Think of one place, not 100, one place that matters to you when you think about why place matters. All right? And then why does it matter to you? Let everyone finish that conversation, so like 2 minutes a person at most, and then we'll ask you a second question. And we'll interrupt you in 10 minutes and give you the second question. Okay?
And this is an opportunity really quick to practice some facilitation techniques. So, is there a timekeeper at your table? Is somebody writing down just some important things that they're hearing? So that way at the end of the conversation, you have that.
So I forgot to say that. So in the spirit of modeling this, one person at each table raise your hand if you're willing to monitor and facilitate this conversation to make sure everybody talks, not too long. Okay, we have Greg. Who at your table is willing to play the facilitator? Okay. All right. Okay. So it's up to you to make sure everybody talks in the next 10 minutes. Okay?
Go. All right. we're going to move on to question 2, but we're giving you a choice. You can either use the question, a sense of place is created by physical and social aspects, or now let's talk about the social characteristics that create a sense of place. So you can choose between those 2 questions that are on there. And then I would suggest that you switch facilitators so another person can get a chance to try this on. And it's the same format, 10 minutes, a timekeeper, and choose one of those 2 questions and go.
What we'd like you to do is take 1 minute at each table and talk about what worked about this conversation and what worked with the questions, what worked with facilitation, and we want you to report out at least a couple things that you thought worked well, and we'll write those up. Okay? So take a minute to talk about it. Starting with this table back here, and we'll go around several rounds. What's one thing that worked that you would recommend? Okay?
Everyone was respectful of the time.
That's not gonna happen.
I think we all go fantastic.
All right.
We got totally engrossed in each other's stories,
Right.
and the time was out the window.
So if you were engrossed in each other's stories, you're saying it was a good thing, you were on the theme, and
Yes.
it was fun.
And exactly, but everyone got an opportunity to contribute.
Okay, so that's where the formal versus informal, if you're on, it's an art, it's not a science, right? It's not so rigid. If somebody's saying something that's really powerful, and you're gonna say, sorry, time's up. And then my grandma fell off this cliff. Sorry, we'll come back to that later. You don't leave people hanging on a cliff,
Right.
right? So you have to follow that, all right?
Yeah, we have one story to finish up when we're done.
All right. One thing,
Listen with intention.
okay.
When we talk about rephrasing with questions too, or rephrasing or asking questions, having time to do that.
So what we want to know is what promoted listening with intention. So rephrasing the questions was one piece of that, okay? We'll keep going.
We had eye contact between the facilitator and timekeeper, so that we didn't have to interrupt the person who was speaking.
I like that. Facilitator, timekeeper, eye contact. Very nice way of making things flow without it seeming like you're being governed by rules and things, all right? Another one, back in the back.
Yes. Genuine interest and follow-up questions.
Okay? So follow-up questions are important, all right? Good. These are great. One more.
I have one to add.
No? All right.
Those are all good.
Okay. Any more here at this table?
Oh yeah, we spoke about the fact that because we respected time, people used less than they were allotted, and so there was free time to follow up questions and try to understand each other better.
So follow-up could happen. So I have seen this happen. I've seen this happen multiple times, where, as a facilitator, you give people really clear parameters, and you're very clear about that. It's also good to start with somebody who you have a good sense will actually respect the time. Like if you know there's a real talker in your room, and you let them go first, you're modeling the bad behavior, right? And so pick somebody that you know is maybe going to be respectful of the time. But anyway, when you do that, when you give those parameters and then people follow those, you don't have to be the police. They police themselves. And so, or I don't know if that's the right analogy, but they monitor their own behavior. And then that allows time at the end. That's much better than having to cut people off. So one of the questions for this table back here is you were so engrossed in the stories, but not everyone got to tell their stories. So that...
We want to go back to...
Oh, you want to go back to one? Yeah. Yeah, so here's the thing. Judging your... And this is something you will have to work out with your host. Does your host have a hard stop? There's no limit to how long these... We programmed this for 2 hours. but it could be they go 3 hours. It could be they go an hour and a half. So you need to work with your host and judge your group to know how the energy is. I would say if people have an expectation it's going to end at 5 o'clock or whatever, then you need to say, you know, it's 4:45 and we're really having a good time. Does anybody have a hard stop, or could we go on a little bit longer? And those are things that we can do.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between being at the table as a facilitator and what some of these people might have with those remote people?
Right, that's a good question. So, and the guide talks about this as well. So some of you are going to be more like in the position that Jerry and I have been in. You're going to be one facilitator for 25 or 30 people, and there's going to be conversations. So you're going to have to ask people you're going to have to stand up here and say, would somebody be willing to be a facilitator and a timekeeper at each table? And then you give them some clues and say, you know, just keep track of the time, remind people of the question. If you're the facilitator and you see people kind of wandering off in a different direction, it's fine to remind people that, you know, there is a conversation that you want to have and that you would like to make sure everybody gets a chance to speak. So you do a little coaching for the table facilitator. Because if you have a group of 30, there's not going to be 4 facilitators, one for each table. There's going to be you. So you're going to have to manage it from up above. And then from the front. And then what I would do is we didn't do this, but I would go around to each table and pop in each conversation. And if they're talking about that horrible loss to the Golden State Warriors, that's not quite the same conversation that we thought we were going to have, right? And so,
I forgot about that.
JR, no personal agenda here. So you might want to, if that happens, what would you do? What would you do if you were in my position and you dipped in a table and they were talking about sports or something that's not related to what you think the conversation was intended to be about?
I would ask them if they are talking about what they are supposed to.
Okay, so that's one idea. So you guys are finished with the question we gave you, and you've moved on?
Maybe try to tie place into that. Maybe
Yeah.
we're talking about sports. And
Yeah.
place.
Yeah, and so you might ask the question. So you're talking about the Cavs. Obviously, they're part of our place. Is that part of your conversation about place? And just ask them to make the links. Yes, over here. Go ahead.
Yes, I would say, if I were maybe a little longer, and maybe a little longer, and I would say, sometimes people like to network afterwards.
Yeah.
So I say, could you visit it later afterwards? So
Okay.
like that.
Right. So if it's just to repeat, so if it's a larger conversation, a larger group, and you see that happening, you could say, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for informal networking after we finish the conversation, and so we encourage you to continue that conversation then. Is that roughly it? Yeah? Okay. Those are all good suggestions. I think there's a gentle way in which you can redirect people. And so I like the idea of linking their conversation back to place. And so you might say, so this is part of your conversation about place. The team is really important to you in this place. And they're like, no, really, we just got off track. Let's go back. And they might self-correct at that point. Yeah. Okay. So you've had the conversation, and we gave you 2 questions. What we're suggesting is you actually do 3. And the sample agenda has, pick a place. So that starts with something very personal. What is a place that's important to you personally? And then it goes to what makes place important. And there's a people question, and there's a place question, physical and social. And so you can go through all 3 of those if you have time. You can write your own questions. It's up to you. That's why the sample agenda is there. Or you can put a menu of questions on the table. And so you can write questions about place and leave them on the table and say, they could be separate little circles with a question on them, and you could say, pick one up that you think is worth talking about.
That's a good piece of work to do if you're not the host, with your host in advance as kind of that preparation for the day, because then you'll also know the mindset. So For me, I'm doing a local food conversation, so I'm going to have questions that are a little different, but I want them to link to this dialogue, so I'll do that in advance.
Yeah, so once you're linked with your host, you will have an opportunity to sit down with your host, and we really, really encourage that. Plan out the day. How are people going to be welcomed into the space? Because it starts right there. So you had Noel welcoming you into the place, and I apologize for people that went to the wrong building. And we didn't have a sign over there, and I forgot to put the sign up over there. So that was I didn't know the building wouldn't be open. So some of you were like, what happened? So that's an important piece of information, is how do you welcome people? How do you have people sign in? Will you have name tags? And then another piece of that I would say is important is some people, some of these conversations might have 70% of the people know each other well and 30% of the percent don't. So if you're the facilitator and you figured that out with the host, it's like, oh, well, a whole bunch of my friends are coming, and then I opened it up and there's 7 other people coming that I don't know. Then I would be deliberate about how do you make sure that those 7 people are welcomed in. And as I broke up this table back here, because it was all folks related to Neighborhood Connection, and I made Greg move, which was enriched your life, didn't it? So if you see a bunch of people come together, you might say, we encourage you to each go to a different table so that you can meet some new people today. So find some ways to work with your host. You can put name tags with random table numbers on them. So if there's 6 tables, you just make name tags. Each name tag has a 1, 2, 3, and then as people come in, and if you have them in a stack that go 1, the second one is 2, the third one is 3, and people write their name on there, then they're immediately going to be sent to 6 different tables if 6 people come at once. So those are little tricks you can do to without being invasive, like you 2 can't sit together. Although I did that with Greg because he's my friend. But that way, it's like, oh, well, you have a number on there. That's the table and then you put a table number on each table and say, go find your table and meet some new friends. And it looks like an opportunity rather than a scolding. Does that make sense? So you've had the conversation. You've welcomed people in. You've done the welcome. You've had a conversation. Then you want to do a little bit of debriefing. We did it about what made the facilitation work, but you may want to say, instead of putting what worked up here, you might put the power of place at the top and say, what is the power of place? Or why does place matter? And have people debrief, like we did today, about why place matters. Or, in your case, related to food. And
you don't have, just to be clear, depending on who you're facilitating for, you may or may not be capturing information.
Yeah.
It may be just a conversation.
Yeah. So that's up to you. Some of these conversations are very focused around a specific organization that actually has a goal. They want to have a conversation about the schools in the neighborhood, and so they want to get something out of it. And so you're going to be more focused in that case, and you're going to want to try to capture what you can. So you capture some of the essence of the conversation, and then the big question comes: this was really great. What are we going to do about it? We had some ideas at our table about schools in the neighborhood and how to strengthen the relationship between the neighborhood and the community and the schools. What can we do about that? That's where the great people from Neighborhood Connections come in. So we've introduced Jerry Pena. This is Erica Brown, and she's a facilitator at the trainings as well, and she's going to walk us through, with Jerry, what are the options for people who want to do something. And so, and you want to you want to have a conversation, and then you want to have, where do we go forward? And you want to allow at least, I think we say in the guide, 30 minutes for that, right? Because you don't want to cut that short, because maybe they want to meet again. Maybe 2 people want to have coffee. Maybe the whole group wants to come back together. Maybe they actually want to do a project together. So going forward can be new relationships, can be another meeting, it can be actually designing and carrying out a project, and getting funding. And those are all options that are going to be supported. So I'm going to turn it over to Jerry and Erica, and they're going to talk about that.
All right, folks. So the beautiful part about this year is that we are creating some structures for folks who want to move these conversations forward. So last year there were some amazing conversations, but a lot of people walked away thinking, well, what's next? What can we do? Is there support? Is there resources to do this? This year, Stephanie and her team and IOB and Neighborhood Connections and Mark and his team at SIN have helped create these structures and resources for people to move these conversations forward in an actionable way, right? So one of the things that we do at Neighborhood Connections, and Erica's going to talk a little bit more about this, is that we host action clinics every month for residents in the city of Cleveland who have a great idea and want to figure out how to move that idea forward. And so they come to this action clinic. We help them come up with a pretty comprehensive plan to move the idea forward, to build a team, to figure out how they can get resources to do that, and then we support them as they move their work forward. Just an example of that, last year we had a young lady who came to us with this idea of creating a support group for young girls at the school she worked at. So she came to the action clinic, we helped her create this action plan. She moved it forward to the point where she created a team. The support meetings for the youth started happening. She ended up winning Employee of the Year for CMSD last year because of that idea, and got fully funded from Neighborhood Connections with a grant to make that happen and make it come to life. And so we want to make sure that at least most of these conversations this year, if they want to move it forward, that we're going to be there for them and we're going to provide those resources and that structure for them.
Hi, and let me just give a shout out to our Celebrity Action Clinic steward, Greg, in the corner there. Raise your hand. You're so enthusiastic. So Greg would actually be one of the people who would be working with people during our action clinics. But to get to that point, you see in your sample agenda the part about capturing the conversation. So much like we captured the conversations captured what worked for the facilitation conversations, you also want to capture what happened in the conversation to see if people want to move into the next thing and want to follow up. Like we've all said, sometimes the conversation is what the most important thing is, where people have had the conversation and they are happy that they had a conversation, they're happy that they got to meet other people, they're happy that they got to hear stories and they want to continue hearing those stories, and that was the important part of the conversation and that was their takeaway. For some people, and especially like with organizations that are having targeted conversations or things that lead to action, that people are hoping will lead to action, and that's why they're hosting these conversations, then you can go into those questions that are listed under capturing the conversation. So I'm going to just go through them. I'll just do it anyway for the good of the camera. So what emerges as the most meaningful takeaway from today's conversation? Sometimes just asking people what was most meaningful to them gets them to say, oh, this was meaningful because, and that's why I want to do something else. This was so meaningful to me that I want to take it to the next level, and then I need to figure out how to take it to the next level. How are you inspired to be and to act differently as a result of this conversation? If I'm inspired to do something totally different as a result of leaving this conversation, I probably want to do it right away. So we're going to have spaces. You'll see, I'll go through the calendar real quickly with you. There will be spaces for people to take that and do something else. If I'm inspired, if I want to be different, if I want to act differently, then I want to talk to somebody else who also wants to do that. I want to have a teammate. Maybe somebody who's at my table is like, yeah, I'll go do that with you also. The next one is, are there any steps this group would like to take? So you might have a group at one table, depending on how large your conversation is. You might have the entire group that wants to take something to the next level. And so you'll also give them something to follow up.
Or you might have multiple ideas that come out of that same conversation that folks want to move to the next level.
The idea of that makes me giddy. Okay. Point participants towards the resource guide to help with your next steps, including action clinics, fundraising workshops, and funding from Neighborhood Connections or IOB. So for Neighborhood Connections, our next grant cycle, the applications are due the second Friday in August. So this will be a perfect time if people are thought about something or really are focused on something and really wanted to take it to the next level. If it's an idea that they could flesh out and get to that point where they have a team, they could apply for Neighborhood Connections grant. IOB is also, they do crowdfunding for community projects. That's something that people could use to take it to the next level. But what we're going to start with is that when Common Ground happens on the 24th, you will have in hand, so this is just a very quick question.
Can you describe what it is?
Oh gosh, okay. So first I'm going to read the thing, just because I want to get her language right. It's right on the back of the facilitator's guide, because I never want to get it wrong, and then I'll talk about the actual person there. They're the premier crowdsourcing platform for people doing good nationwide. It is more than just crowdfunding. It is community-led positive change. IOB gives leaders the ability to organize all kinds of capital, cash, social networks, in-kind donations, volunteers, and advocacy to build real lasting change from the ground up. IOB stands for In Our Backyards. So a lot of things that happen out here in this world and in these streets, people talk about as NIMBY. Not in my backyard. Like, sure, I'm on board as long as it's not in my backyard. I don't want that happening in my backyard. I don't want to be involved in that. This is specifically saying, yes, I want this in our backyard. I want to do this thing. I want to lead this positive change in my community. So for people who are really focused on making and leading that positive change in their community, IOB comes through for that. So Indigo Bishop is the action strategist here in Cleveland for IOB, and she helps people navigate through their website. They can set up sites, different funding campaigns. She helps people navigate what their networks are, what they can ask people for, and people can go on the IOB crowdfunding. You may have $5 to give, but that's fine. We got a president elected twice on $5 donations. So, I'm just saying, because that's not political. I just made a comment. But you might have $5 to donate. You might have a truck to donate to haul stuff. You might have volunteers that can come and help you do things. IOB gives you the opportunity to access all those resources and not just cash in a crowdsourced funding platform. So that's what those two things are. Neighborhood Connections and IOB will help with that. So the way that we're doing that, so the action clinics are the only thing that have an actual time down right now, but we wanted to have something for you to look at just to see how much stuff is available for people afterwards. You will have the final copy in your facilitator kits, so the hosts will get them, and they will be at your sites on the 24th. So make sure that you have those and you look at those real quick to just give to people and say, these are the times and these are the places that we'll be able to follow up and you'll be able to do the next thing. So the first thing, the day after Common Ground, will be a happy hour. And that happy hour will be at Goldhorn Brewery. That's at 55th and St. Clair. And it's just a nice casual place for people to get together. So that's people who are like coming back, and there's a donut place right next door. Big Mouth Donuts. Yes, I'm not saying what we've had at work. So there will be an opportunity to do like a happy hour gathering. So it's like a really low pressure way to just move into it. Like you wanted to meet up with somebody again after the conversation. This is the place where you can say, let's meet up again. This is the place to network with other people. Like, I want to see what other people talked about. I want to see who shows up. I'm showing up, not just for work, but because I am like so nosy. And I'm like, I want to see who shows up and what their ideas were. Because there are so many conversations and I can't go to all of them. I'm going to try to go to some, depending on how the schedule works. But that is an opportunity to come together in a very informal way. The very next night, on the 26th, will be an action clinic at Neighborhood Connections from 6 to 8 at the offices at the Agora. That'll be an opportunity for people who are just like, oh no, I know what I want to do and I know kind of how I want to attack it. I just need help fleshing it out. And that's where we'll be able to help people get an action plan down to see if it's something that can go somewhere else, to see how they need to build a team, to see what other steps they need to take. On the 27th, there will be a fundraising workshop, and that will be for IOB. That'll be with Indigo at the Carnegie Library. Then on the 29th, there will be another happy hour. I really like this. So there will be another happy hour, because there will be people who weren't able to make those ones earlier in the week, but that will be Friday. So then they can come to happy hour at Goldhorn. Happy hour at Goldhorn is awesome. Not that I was just there yesterday, I'm just saying. And then on that Saturday, for people... You were checking out the place. It was research. See, we were doing it together because I knew she was coming to facilitation today. It was smart research. So that Saturday, for people who can't do things in the evening or during the week, there's also availability in the afternoon at the Carnegie Library. So we'll be doing an action clinic there. And so that'll actually be someone from Neighborhood Connections and also someone from IOB will be at that one. And then we're not doing anything the week of the holiday because we figured that would be hard and we're respectful of people's time. And yeah, it's the holiday and people will be gone, including probably some of us who would be facilitating these things. So then the very next week, though, there's another fundraising workshop at Urban Community School. So we're doing East and West, so people from all over the city have an opportunity to come to these things. And then there'll be another action clinic that Tuesday at Neighborhood Connections, and as you see, another Friday happy hour at Goldhorn. And then as the month goes on, there are a couple more events that we have in the calendar. If any more are added, those will be in the host kit materials, and then you'll have access to all of those. So then the fundraising workshop at Clark Fulton and another one at Merwin's Wharf. So we're going to do East to West. There will also be, if you're hosting anyone, I think probably everyone in here is doing just Cuyahoga County. Okay, so everyone in here is doing Cuyahoga County, but just so that you're aware of what happens also, there will also be materials available for like a webinar for people who are in Geauga and Lake County also. So if anyone asked you that question or if they were interested in anything else, because people will ask you all kinds of questions that even though you're doing a conversation in Cuyahoga County, they will still ask you questions about the other places. And so there you go. But you'll have all that information on the day of Common Ground. Do you have any questions for me?
Can I add one thing to the calendar? Not for you, no, but just for people to know, as a low-key way for people to connect again, on the Tuesday after the Common Ground conversation at noon on Public Square, there'll be the Last for the Love of Cleveland, which is going to be about storytelling in our neighborhoods. And so if people want a place where they can come together, it's a free event. It's open to the public. It'll be noon to 1 on the 26th. We'll add that to the calendar, but it's just another place for folks to use.
You said that Public Square?
Yeah, Public Square, noon to 1. It'll be on the
Tuesday,
website, too.
on the 25th. No, you're right, 26th. And I wanted to jump into, since Erica mentioned the host kits, for those of you who are hosts and then also for facilitators. So host kits are going to be arriving at host locations the week of June 11th, so that we're going to sort of be delivering those in batches. But I just wanted to make sure everybody took a look at both the host guide and the facilitator guide. We have 2 handy-dandy host checklists, but it also would be helpful if you're planning on being a facilitator to know sort of the different types of materials that the foundation is going to be providing to all hosts and that will be there and what they're going to be used for. So I just wanted to note we will have these cards in the host kit. There will be, we were talking about the questions earlier, so there's going to be cool little sticker decals that you can write your questions, either whether they're from this agenda or the ones that you make up. Those can be stuck on the tables. Those are removable, so don't worry, you can take them right off once you put them there. But I just wanted to make that note that the host kit has a lot of these materials that we discussed today, and those will be arriving the week of June 11th to the different locations.
Yeah. Will the host kit also have like the signage that we can put outside? Like
Yes. So just for the mic asking about the host kits and signage and whether we're going to have location signage, and yes, each location will be receiving 2 signs.
Yard signs.
Yard signs, yeah. Just sort of like the, almost that look like campaign signs. Okay. Any other questions on host kits? Okay, thanks. Thanks for letting me jump in.
And I would just add that I know it feels like a lot, right, for next steps. You don't have to be an expert on IOB or Neighborhood Connections, but what you can do is point them at the calendar, let them know that at any of these events, even if it's an IOB event, Neighborhood Connections is going to be there. We're all partnered up together, so we're all trying to be in the same spaces so we won't miss anyone, okay?
All right, I'm a professor, so I'm going to give you a quiz. All right, so you are hosting a conversation in Lakewood, Ohio. And your group is very enthused, and they say, we want to do something. We want to figure out how to get organized. And we might need some money to do it. What are their options? What do you say?
Write a grant for their neighborhood
I would say, look at the back at your resource guide. You have several different options. IOP being one for crowdfunding, there's the connections being one for specific funding, and then on the calendar, saying you're going to do training or whether it's going to be more information, and go from there.
Great. All right, we're getting closer. So the reason this was a trick question. So I know I'm teasing you. I'm teasing you.
He's a professor.
Yeah. So the reason I wanted to make this point is because Neighborhood Connections does not do funding in Lakewood. Okay? Neighborhood Connections only funds the city of Cleveland and East Cleveland. Okay? So make sure you know that. because you don't want to send them there and then they can't get a grant. But they can go to the Action Clinic at Neighborhood Connections, and they can get ideas about how to raise funds, and they can use IOBI, which is not a grant, but it's a crowdfunding source. And so, you see those on Facebook, and people, GoFundMe is another example of this. So IOBI is really great because they'll actually help you put the fundraising campaign together. And there's a match. So go ahead.
So if you crowdfund using IOB for a Common Ground conversation idea, the Cleveland Foundation is offering a match to what you can crowdfund up to, good question. I'll ask it.
Okay. So,
I know how much money she has. I don't know how much she's going to partake per project.
Okay, so let's say you need $1,000 for your project in Lakewood. You can do crowdfunding for $500, and the Cleveland Foundation will match that for $500, and you've got your $1,000. So you do get a grant. Okay. So am I all right? Okay.
The other thing I want to add to that is that the grant cycle starts in August again for Neighborhood Connections, but we are giving small angel grants in the meantime coming out of these conversations. Yeah. So it's somewhere
but
around...
still only Cleveland and
only
East
Cleveland and East Cleveland, around $250 or something like that for ideas.
Okay. So there's a normal grant, but they'll learn that in the Action Clinic. Yep. So the main thing is to drive people to the Action Clinic, and then the other thing is that Neighborhood Connections grants are available for Cleveland and East Cleveland. And outside of that, in the rest of the county and in Lake and Geauga County, there is IOB crowdsourcing and matching funds from Cleveland Foundation. So we didn't make that as explicit, so that's why I'm apologizing and trying to be clear, all right? Any other things that you're sitting with before we do our checkout that you want to ask about?
When will we find out where we will actually be?
Good question. So I think we're working on that. So that's what the survey, the check-in survey that you all took today is going to help us do that and pair volunteer facilitators with the locations that they're interested in serving. If you haven't filled out the check-in survey, please do and let us know, especially if you're here as a volunteer and you'd like to be paired with a Common Ground conversation. You can do that either on the machines here or via our SurveyMonkey link, which we will share for those of you on the webinar. You will have that. Please fill that out. We'll be in touch in the next week or so to pair you up. So you'll receive an email from the Cleveland Foundation, and we'll communicate with you about where your placement will be.
Can you talk about the participant survey?
Yes. The other really, really important thing for facilitators and hosts to know is the foundation doesn't collect any of the information that participants share with hosts during the conversation. So the notes you're taking and stuff, that is for the good of the participants, and then sometimes the hosts might collect it, but we don't collect it from the Cleveland Foundation. The only thing we do collect is our post-event survey. I talked about it when I first did the introduction. We have the report from last year's survey over here on the table if you're interested in seeing that, or you can download it on our website at clevelandfoundation.org/common ground. But the participant survey is really, really important, and we ask our hosts and our facilitators to please encourage the folks that are participating to fill that out while they're there. There will be actual physical hard copies there that people can actually sit and fill out while they're there, or they can fill it out online. So that's really important because that's the way we gauge the success of the event. We get ideas on how to improve the event, and we're able to make this even bigger and better for next year.
One more question.
Okay.
Yeah. Where's the room of rest?
The
restroom? The room of rest, yeah. Right before you go to the outside. All right. So now he quizzed me. So you had the conversation, you talk about the Action Clinic, you talk about funding options, you have them finish the survey. The last thing is actually to close the conversation. And one of the things is useful, and I'm a social worker, and closure is always very important for us as social workers. It's a psychological thing that says this event is now come to an end. And we're going to do that right now with you, but we encourage you to do it in your conversations. And so it's important to put a period at the end of this wonderful event. It doesn't mean people have to leave. It just means that they're free to leave and they're free to get up and move around. Because have you ever been at an event that kind of just fizzles out and people kind of wander off and you're like, is it over? So we want people to know, yes, this has been great, and it is formally over. You're welcome to stay and network and have some more food and get dessert and coffee, whatever the host wants you to be able to do. But we're officially ending the meeting. And so we want to make sure we do that, and we're going to do it with a checkout question today, and we want you to think about checkout questions, and there's some samples in the guide.
I should have asked this earlier. Is there, like, besides the end of year report, is there a way to, like, the people can blog about what they're doing or anything like that? Like, how do you keep track as these projects are going on?
So we are using, on social media, we're using a couple hashtags, but I encourage you to please send it to us. I've got my card. If you're going to blog, I mean, we're going to be sort of stalking to find out where people are talking about us, but there's hashtags on Twitter. Please share anything you write and we'll find it and reach out, or send it to me directly. It'd be great.
Then the last thing is, if you for further reading and preparation, this facilitating community conversations that the Community Innovation Network, which I direct here at CASE, has put together. There's a whole thing on role of this is not directly for Common Ground, but it's a resource on role of facilitator, how to create space in terms of ground rules, and then there's some tips and tricks for facilitators. And then there's a whole section about creating brave spaces where you can have really honest, courageous conversations. And that includes things like facilitating dialogues about race, 7 ways to deal with others' emotions, how to deal with your own emotions, diffusing anger. So those are kind of, and then how do you actually do some brainstorming and planning. So those are resources that you can use as preparation. So now we're going to formally end the session, and what we like to do is a checkout, just like we do a checkout in. That's to make sure every voice is in the room and everyone's feeling a sense of completion of that. And Jerry's going to lead us in that.
All right. And 2 things real quick before I ask the checkout question. One is that we still have room to train more facilitators. So on June 6th, there'll be a training at Urban Community School from 10 to 12 on the west side. So if you know folks, you guys look like good recruiters. If you know folks who want to be facilitators, send them our way. And then June 19th at Neighborhood Connections from 6 to 8 p.m. will be the last training right before Common Ground. All right, so send us your people. So the closeout question today, first of all, I want to thank you guys for spending your Saturday with us, and hopefully you enjoy the rest of the day. And we'll go around, and starting with this table here where Kwame's at. Kwame, raise your hand. Yeah, Kwame. What are you sitting with as you leave? What are you sitting with as you leave today?
In how long? 1 sentence?
In one sentence or 3 words or...
3 words?
Yeah.
What do you feel?
I'm sitting with the
What's
possibility that good conversation.
Got you going.
I don't know if the word is possibility, but I'm thinking the power that good conversation has to create change.
Yeah.
That's what I'm living with.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I'm going to say a sense of hope.
Excitement.
Possibility.
A vulnerability. 5 people. I like that.
Transparency.
The power of one.
The power of many.
You see what our conversation is. Mine is gratitude.
Aww. I'm feeling connection.
Equity.
Excited.
Pride in Cleveland for having this space to do this.
Work to do.
Optimism.
Anticipation for the 24th.
The great diversity.
Mine is anticipation.
You can have the same one.
I can have the same one. Here we go. Anticipation of great things to come.
I would just say I love Cleveland, and the people here, so it's amazing. Jeff, you have something? I know you're the camera guy, but what are you leaving with?
Leaving with excitement.
All right. All right.
So I started with a quote. I'm going to end with my second favorite quote. Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, "You owe me." Imagine what happens to a love like that. It lights the whole sky. Want to hear that again? Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, "You owe me." Imagine what happens to a love like that. It lightens the whole sky. That's from Hafiz. So that's what I love about Cleveland.
Thank you. Yeah.